What if nothing is waiting to judge you when you die? What if the cosmic courtroom, the weighing of souls, the final verdict rendered by an external authority, was never real to begin with? What if the entire framework of judgment, the concept that has haunted human consciousness for over 2,000 years, was a construction? A carefully engineered illusion designed to keep you focused on the wrong thing, at the wrong moment, for the wrong reason. The Gnostics, those ancient seekers whose writings were buried in the sands of Nag Hammadi for 1,600 years, described something radically different. They spoke of what actually happens when consciousness separates from the body, and it bears almost no resemblance to what every religion has taught you. There is no tribunal. There is no figure seated on a throne holding a ledger of your deeds. There is no moment of reckoning where some external intelligence decides your fate based on a list of rules you may or may not have followed. What is there is far more unsettling. Because judgment, as brutal as it sounds, is at least something happening to you. Something external. Something you can blame, appeal to, bargain with. What the Gnostics described cannot be negotiated with. It cannot be appealed. It cannot be escaped through piety or good behavior or belief in the right doctrines. Because what happens after death, according to the hidden teachings, is not judgment at all. It is reflection. And the thing being reflected is not your actions. It is what you have taken yourself to be. This distinction is not theological hair-splitting. It is the difference between a universe that operates on morality and a universe that operates on recognition. And if the Gnostics were correct, every institution that has taught you to prepare for judgment has been preparing you for the wrong thing entirely. They have been giving you a map for a courtroom that does not exist. While the actual structure of reality continues functioning according to laws that have nothing to do with reward or punishment, the terrifying beauty of this teaching is that it is not reserved for death. The mechanism the Gnostics described is already active. Right now, in this moment, every layer of the structure they mapped is already responding to something you are presenting, something you are identifying with, something you have taken to be yourself without ever questioning whether it is actually you. And what the Gnostic mirror reflects back, long before your final breath, is exactly what you have never looked at clearly. By the end of this journey, you will understand why judgment was never the point, and you will begin to see what was always being reflected, even now. In every moment you thought was simply your life. To understand why the concept of divine judgment took hold so completely, you have to step back from the assumption that it was always part of the spiritual landscape. It was not. In the earliest mystical traditions, including the Gnostic schools that preceded institutional Christianity, judgment was not the central feature of the afterlife. It was a later addition. A framework that was imposed onto earlier teachings had described something quite different. The Gnostic texts found at Nag Hammadi, particularly the Apocryphon of John and the Pistis Sophia, described the soul's passage after death as a movement through structures, not as a trial. These structures are not ethical in nature. They do not evaluate behavior. They respond to a far more fundamental condition, what the soul is still identified with at the moment of separation from the body. The difference between these two frameworks is not subtle. One asks what you did. The other responds to what you are. Consider what it meant for the institutions that rose in the centuries after Jesus to adopt the judgment model. If the afterlife is a matter of identification, then external religious authority becomes largely irrelevant. No priest can adjust what you are identified with. No ritual can change your fundamental recognition. No ecclesiastical structure can position itself between the soul and its passage, because the passage does not involve permission granted from above. It involves seeing clearly from within. But if the afterlife is a matter of judgment, everything changes. Suddenly there are rules to follow, sacraments to receive, doctrines to believe, confessions to make. A structure arises that requires mediation, that positions institutions between the soul and its fate, that turns the most intimate moment of consciousness into a regulated event requiring official guidance. The Gnostics watched this transformation occur and recognized it for what it was: an inversion. The actual mechanism, pure reflection based on identification, was reframed as moral evaluation based on behavior. And once that reframing was complete, the original teaching became nearly unrecognizable. What was lost in this inversion was not just a concept. It was a diagnostic. The Gnostic understanding of the afterlife was in its original form, a mirror that showed the soul exactly where it had not yet seen clearly. It was a teaching about attention, not about sin. About recognition, not about virtue. The 365 layers described in the hidden texts were not ethical checkpoints. They were reflective surfaces, each one responding to a different quality of identification the soul might still be carrying. None of them asked about your deeds. All of them responded to the question the soul had never asked itself: what am I actually identifying with right now? The architect of the material system, whom the Gnostics called Yaldabaoth or the Demiurge, did not need to judge souls. His system was far more elegant than that. It simply reflected. And because most souls had never learned to see through their own identifications, the reflection appeared to them as reality. They would encounter fear and believe the fear was theirs. They would encounter desire and believe the desire defined them. They would encounter an unexamined sense of self and believe that self was real. And the system, requiring nothing more than this continued unconscious identification, would simply continue. Not as punishment, as continuation. This is why the Gnostics insisted that belief was irrelevant to the actual structure. You cannot believe your way through a mirror. You can only see what it is showing you. And seeing is not something institutions can perform on your behalf. It is something that must occur within the soul itself, which is precisely why the teaching had to be inverted for the institutions to retain their necessity. A soul that understands the mirror needs no mediator. A soul that believes in judgment needs priests, scriptures, and sacraments forever. The actual mechanism the Gnostics described is more radical than any theology built on judgment, because it dispenses entirely with the idea of an external evaluator. There is no one watching. There is no one deciding. There is no record being kept. There is only reflection, instant and complete, of whatever the soul is still holding. And the soul, in almost every case, has no idea what it is holding, which is precisely why the reflection produces such disorientation. Imagine standing before a mirror that shows not your face, but every identification you have ever accepted as yourself without questioning it. Every fear you took to be part of who you are. Every desire you treated as essential to your identity. Every role you inhabited so completely that you forgot it was a role. Every thought pattern you never separated from awareness itself. All of it, visible at once, reflected back with total precision. This is what the Pistis Sophia describes, not in these words, but in meaning. The soul encounters itself. Not the self it remembers. Not the self it curated. The actual contents of what it never examined. The horror of this encounter is not that something external is punishing you. The horror is that nothing is. The reflection is the entire event. And because the soul has spent a lifetime identifying with whatever appeared in consciousness, the reflection locks onto the soul like a frequency matching a signal. Wherever the identification is strongest, that is where the soul resonates. And resonance in this cosmology is inhabitation. The layer does not absorb you. You simply become indistinguishable from what it is reflecting, because you never learn to see yourself as separate from it. Consider how this already operates in ordinary waking experience, long before death. A thought arises. Before you can observe it, it has become your thought. A fear surfaces. Before you can witness it, it has become your fear. A role activates. a social identity, a reaction, a preference, a narrative about who you are. And in the fraction of a second between appearance and identification, something that was simply passing through consciousness has become consciousness itself. This is the mechanism. Not after death. Right now. The only difference between this moment and the post-death passage is that now, the density of physical existence slows the process down enough to distract you from noticing it. The Gnostic texts are precise about what the system responds to. It is not virtue. It is not belief. It is not intention. It is identification. The quiet automatic movement of taking something to be you without ever asking whether it actually is you. And because this movement happens so continuously, so seamlessly, so deeply beneath the threshold of ordinary attention, the soul rarely recognizes that it is happening at all. It simply experiences the results. It feels like me when I am afraid. It feels like me when I desire. It feels like me when I react. And because it feels like me, the identification completes. This is why the Gnostics taught that recognition, not morality, is the key to the entire system. Recognition does not mean intellectual understanding. It does not mean believing the right things about yourself. It means the actual in-the-moment seeing of identification as it is happening. The brief window before a thought becomes your thought, before a fear becomes your fear, before a role becomes your identity. That window exists. It is always there. It is simply almost never noticed. Because noticing it requires a quality of attention the archonic layers are specifically designed to prevent. And this is what makes the Gnostic mirror such a precise metaphor, because a mirror does not judge. A mirror does not evaluate. A mirror does not have preferences about what it shows. It simply reflects with absolute accuracy whatever stands before it. And the only thing that changes what it reflects is what you are still standing as. Step out of the identification, and the reflection has nothing to hold on to. Stand as the identification, and the reflection is indistinguishable from your entire experience. This is not theology. This is the operating system of consciousness itself, as the Gnostics understood it. And it has been functioning beneath ordinary awareness for every moment of every life you have ever lived. The structure the Gnostics described is not vague. It is architectural. 365 layers, each governed by a specific force, each responding to a specific quality of identification. At the summit of this architecture sits Yaldabaoth, whom the Apocryphon of John describes not as a malevolent god, but as a blind one. A being of enormous power whose defining characteristic is that he cannot see beyond his own creation. His ignorance is not incidental. It is the foundation of the entire system. Yaldabaoth believes himself to be the only god. Not because this is true, but because the layers above him are beyond his perceptual range. He cannot see the pleroma, the fullness from which he ultimately emerged. He cannot see Sophia, the divine wisdom whose yearning brought him into existence. He cannot see the monad, the uncreated source beyond all structures. His blindness is so complete that it has become the organizing principle of the reality he constructs. And every soul that moves through his system is encountering, in some form, a reflection of this blindness. The inability to see beyond identification. The conviction that what appears is all there is. Beneath Yaldabaoth, the Apocryphon of John names 7 subordinate rulers who govern the most dense layers of experience. Their names appear strange to modern ears, yet each represents a specific pattern that shapes human consciousness. Ethith, the ruler of bestial form. Kalila, the force of limitation. Harmas, the one who generates agitated movement. Yabal, whose nature is division. Adneos, governing reactive authority. Cain, the pattern of self-assertion. And Abel, the quality of submission. These are not deities in the religious sense. They are forces, patterns, qualities that shape how identification forms and where it anchors. Below these 7, The structure expands into the full 365 layers, each one refining the pattern further. The lower layers correspond to the obvious identifications, the raw emotional states, the primary fears, the dense reactions. A soul moving through these layers encounters its fear of annihilation, its hunger for continuation, its desperate grasping at existence itself. Each layer reflects one of these back, and wherever the soul is still identified, resonance locks in. The soul does not pass through, it inhabits. Not because it has been condemned, but because it has never seen this particular identification clearly enough to stand apart from it. This is where the Pistis Sophia becomes diagnostic. The text describes the soul's progression not as movement through space, but as movement through correspondence. Each layer responds precisely to what is presented. If fear is presented, the layer of fear responds. If desire is presented, the layer of desire responds. If ignorance, the basic conviction that material existence is the totality of reality, is presented, then the layer reflecting that conviction locks onto the soul with perfect precision. There is no cruelty in this. There is only accuracy. The system is not designed to trap. It is designed to reflect. The trap exists only because the soul has never learned to see what it is still holding. The Gnostic teachers describe the ignorance layer as particularly insidious because it operates so far beneath ordinary awareness that it is almost never questioned. The unexamined conviction that you are a body moving through a physical world, that consciousness emerges from matter, that death is the cessation of existence, that what you see is what is. None of these are conclusions reached through investigation. They are assumptions absorbed through cultural immersion, never seriously challenged, never actually looked at. And because they have never been looked at, they function as one of the strongest identifications the system responds to. A soul still anchored in this basic assumption produces a reflection so dense that many other layers become irrelevant. The density holds everything else in place, and this is why the Gnostics place such emphasis on the ability to see clearly, even in ordinary moments, because the structure does not wait for death to become active. It is already active. The same 365 layers that reflect after the body falls away are already reflecting now, just beneath the threshold of attention. Every unexamined identification is already contributing to the density the soul will carry into the passage. And every moment of genuine recognition is already thinning that density. Even before death arrives, if the lower layers reflect the obvious identifications, fear, desire, the dense patterns of reactive existence, then something specific happens as the soul moves higher. The reflections become subtler. The identifications the system responds to become more refined. And this is where many awakening souls, believing themselves to have passed the difficult part, encounter the most elegant traps the Gnostic texts describe. The lower archonic layers are, in a sense, easier to see through, because the identifications they reflect are obvious. When fear rises, it is recognizable as fear. When desire grips, it is recognizable as desire. With attention, the identification can be seen and thinned. But the higher layers do not reflect fear or desire. They reflect something the soul is much less likely to recognize as identification at all. The sense of being the one who's awakening. The conviction of being the seeker, the knower, the one who has seen through the lower layers. This identification feels to the soul nothing like a trap. It feels like progress, which is precisely what makes it so difficult to see through. The Apocryphon of John is specific about this danger. The higher archonic realms do not govern crude limitation. They govern the refined forms of the same fundamental error. Not the mistake of believing you are your fear, but the mistake of believing you are your freedom. Not the misidentification with a body, but the misidentification with a witness. The structure has not changed. Only the quality of what is being reflected has changed. And if the soul arrives at these layers still carrying a sense of self, even a spiritualized self, the mirror has something to hold. This is where the books of Jé become directly relevant. These lesser-known Gnostic texts preserve what appear to be sequences of vowel sounds, pure tones, each corresponding to a different archonic layer. For centuries, these were interpreted literally. Secret passwords spoken by the soul to grant passage, access codes memorized in life and recited after death. But consider what this interpretation assumes. It assumes the system responds to what you say. Yet the entire Gnostic framework insists the system responds only to what you are. If the highest layers suddenly began depending on memorized phrases, the whole structure would contradict itself. The Gnostic texts are not instruction manuals of passwords. They are descriptions of what awareness sounds like when it is no longer contracted around any identity at all. The vowel sequences are not meant to be vocalized outwardly. They are pointing to an inner condition in which consciousness is no longer shaped into any particular form. Not collapsed, not diminished, not absent. Simply present, without being something in particular. When awareness reaches this condition, the Archon governing that layer has nothing to respond to. The layer cannot reflect what presents no identification. The soul does not force passage. It simply no longer resonates with the frequency of the layer. This is what the Gnostics meant by the passage that requires no struggle. The soul does not battle the Archons. It does not outwit them. It does not bypass them through cleverness. It simply ceases to match their frequency. And once the match is broken, the Archon is, as the texts describe, cosmically bound to release what it cannot hold. Not because it has been defeated, because it has nothing to engage with. A mirror cannot reflect empty air, and a soul that has thinned its identification sufficiently appears, to the Archon, as something very close to empty air. Not because the soul is gone, because the identity, the system, requires is no longer being presented. This is the refined understanding that the later inversions of Gnostic teaching could not preserve. The higher passage is not about earning freedom. It is about realizing there is nothing to defend, no position to hold, no spiritual achievement to protect, no awakened identity to carry through the layers. The soul that arrives with all of these still intact will find a mirror waiting for each of them. The soul that arrives with none of them will find the layers have nothing to offer. The difference is not effort. The difference is recognition so complete that even the recognizer has been seen through. Here is what changes everything about the Gnostic teaching. The 365 layers are not waiting for your death to become relevant. They are already active, already responding to what you are presenting, just in a denser form, with enough sensory distraction that the mechanism mostly goes unnoticed. The map the Gnostics left is not only a map of the afterlife, it is a map of this exact moment. Consider how this already operates in your daily experience. A thought appears. Before you register it, it has become your thought. A reaction arises. Before you observe it, it has become your reaction, your fear, your position. This is the mechanism operating in every layer. The soul presents something. The layer reflects it back. And the soul, not recognizing the reflection, begins inhabiting it as reality. The speed at which this happens is what keeps it invisible. But the speed does not change the mechanism. It only obscures it. The Gnostic teachers pointed toward a capacity that exists in every human consciousness, but is almost never cultivated. The capacity to notice the moment before identification completes. That window is brief, almost invisible. The moment where something appears in awareness and has not yet been claimed as mine. Stay there a second longer. Not analyzing, just noticing. Watch what happens next. The mind moves in quickly to label, to pull it into a narrative. That is the archonic pattern operating in ordinary experience. Not something to fight, just something to see. And seeing it, even briefly, changes the correspondence. The layer reflects something. You see the reflection for what it is. For that moment, you are no longer resonating with it. You are not passing through by force. You are simply no longer a match for it. This is what the Gnostic texts describe as recognition. Not intellectual agreement with a concept, but actual in-the-moment seeing that dissolves the identification before it can fully complete. This is why the Gnostics did not teach doctrines. They did not transmit beliefs. They pointed toward a quality of attention that could be cultivated in ordinary life and would naturally continue beyond death. Because the one who has been practicing recognition does not suddenly become a different consciousness after the body falls away. They continue to be what they were. If what they were is a consciousness that sees identification as it arises, the passage through the layers becomes fundamentally different. Not because they have earned passage, because they present less for the layers to hold. Take this one layer deeper. Notice what happens when you begin to identify as the one who has seen through the pattern. The witness, the awakened observer, the spiritual practitioner. At first, this feels like freedom, but the Gnostic texts are precise about what the higher layers reflect. The refined identification, the spiritual seeker as identity, the awakened self as position. Watch that carefully. Is that also something appearing in awareness? Is that also something being held? And if it is, then what is aware of that? This question does not have an answer you can speak. It has a recognition that occurs beneath speaking. Because the moment you try to answer it as the one who knows the answer, you have stepped back into identification. The question dissolves the answerer. And what remains is not a new position, not a superior state, not an achievement to carry. What remains is awareness without the identity the system needs in order to respond. This is what the Gnostics were pointing toward when they used the word gnosis. Not knowledge about the truth, but the direct dissolution of the one who believes they need to know it. And this is why the teaching had to be buried. Because a soul that understands this cannot be governed. It cannot be frightened into obedience by threats of judgment, because it has seen through the one who fears. It cannot be seduced by promises of reward, because it has seen through the one who desires. It cannot be positioned in a hierarchy of belief, because it has seen through the one who believes. The Archonic system, whether operating in the post-death layers or in the institutional structures of the material world, responds only to identification. The soul that has thinned its identifications has quietly stepped out of the system that depends on them. The Gnostic response to this entire structure is not elaborate. It does not require isolation, ritual, initiation, or belief. It requires only the cultivation of a specific quality of attention that can be practiced in any moment, under any circumstance, without anyone else knowing it is happening. Begin here. Right now. In the ordinary flow of consciousness, notice what is appearing. A thought, a sensation, an emotional tone, a fragment of internal narration. Do not try to stop any of it. Do not try to transcend it. Simply notice that something is appearing. And then notice the next movement, the automatic claiming of what has appeared as mine. That claiming is the mechanism. That is identification completing. That is the archonic pattern operating in real time. You do not need to fight this movement. You only need to see it. Seeing it, even for a fraction of a second, introduces a separation. Something appeared. Something was aware of it appearing. These are not the same. The one who's aware cannot be what is appearing, because it is witnessing it. This recognition is subtle, but it is the entire teaching. Every layer of the 365 responds to whether this recognition is operating or not. And every moment you rest in this recognition, even briefly, is a moment the system has less to hold. Practice this in small ways throughout the day. When fear arises, notice it appearing before it becomes your fear. When desire surfaces, notice it appearing before it becomes your desire. When a reaction activates, notice it appearing before it becomes your reaction. You do not need to eliminate any of these. You only need to see them as appearances, not as self. The thinning of identification happens naturally when seeing is present. You are not performing a technique. You are allowing a recognition that has always been available to finally operate without interruption. Now take the practice one layer further. Notice what happens when you begin to feel good about your recognition. When a sense of being the one who sees begins to form. This is the refined identification. Watch it too. Is this also something appearing? Is this also something the mirror would reflect? And what is aware of this subtler movement? Do not try to answer. Just notice that even the awakened identity is something that appears and can be seen. And what sees it is not another identity. It is simply awareness present, without shape. This is what the Gnostics meant by recognition so deep that even the recognizer dissolves. Not into nothingness, not into absence, into presence without position. And this presence is what passes through the layers without resonating with them, because it is not identified with anything the layers can reflect. It is not fear. It is not desire. It is not the seeker. It is not the knower. It is simply what was here before any of these appeared, and what remains when they have been seen through. The practical form of this teaching is not a discipline. It is a return. Throughout the day, return to the simple act of noticing what is appearing and the automatic movement that claims it, not as a spiritual performance, as the ordinary texture of awareness itself, in the pause before breakfast, in the breath between thoughts, in the moment between stimulus and reaction. In each of these, the opportunity for recognition is present. The 365 layers are responding to every one of these moments right now. And every time recognition occurs, the density is thinning, even if you cannot measure it. And this is the final teaching the Gnostics preserved beneath all the inversions that tried to bury it. The passage after death is not a separate event. It is a continuation. Whatever recognition is operating now will continue to operate then. Whatever identification remains unexamined now will continue to be unexamined then. The soul does not become different. It simply encounters the same structure without the distractions that currently obscure it. This is why the Gnostics insisted that the preparation was not ritual, not doctrine, not belief. It was seeing, now, continuously. In the ordinary moments where almost no one thinks to look, there's no judgment waiting. There is only reflection. And the only thing that determines what is reflected is what you are still taking yourself to be. The soul that has seen through its identifications presents nothing for the layers to hold. The soul that has not will find the layers reflecting exactly what was never examined. Neither outcome is punishment. Neither is reward. Both are simply the mechanism operating with the precision it has always operated with. The only question is whether recognition has been cultivated enough that the mirror has nothing to show. And that question is not answered at death. It is answered in every moment you are willing to look clearly at what you have been calling yourself all along.